Welcome, I'm Gary Nolan, and this is a town hall with Libertarian presidential candidate Joe Jorgensen. Dr. Jorgensen, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you.
We have questions from people all over the country. I took the opportunity on my radio broadcast to ask listeners for some questions. So I think I'm going to start with them because, well, they're my listeners, and I'm going to show them some favoritism. Question for Joe J. It says, how do you feel about implementing the fair tax? This is from Pamela Hertzing-Meitzner in Missouri. Well,
I would say the only fair tax is a tax of 0%. So if you'd like me to put a tax of 0%, that's fine.
Well, every government, to some extent, even limited government, does need revenue. Mm-hmm. Where would the federal government get its revenue if not an income tax? I'm assuming you're not fond of the income tax.
No, and only half the revenues that go into our federal government come from the income tax. Other than that, we've got employer, putting in their share of the payroll tax. We've got people putting in the payroll tax. We've got duties, excise taxes. So we do have other avenues. But the first thing I would do is I would go towards getting rid of the income tax so that people would be able to spend their money. And I've been going around the country telling voters that they know better how to spend their money than any special interest or bureaucrat in Washington can.
And I believe that. I'm certainly in your corner when it comes to getting rid of the income tax. But the revenue that I'm not sure what your revenue source would be then. It would be what?
Well, we've got to cut spending as well. We can't keep the current level of spending, but I would suggest that even if we had plenty of money, we need to cut the government in half anyway, because government is already too big. So I would say the biggest cut would be in, and I hate to say this without first introducing it, saying that I want to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. We absolutely have to defend our borders. We have to defend our shores. However, there's no reason to be in 150 different countries around the world. And if you look at our military budget, we spend more than the next 7 countries combined. So if we come home from France, we come home from Germany, the Middle East, Japan, everything like that, that could cut anywhere from $600 to $700 billion. And, I've jokingly said, we hear how great France is because they get 5-week vacations. Well, maybe we'd get 5-week vacations too if we weren't paying for their military.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm still a bit confused, and I want to make sure that I understand. No income tax. You don't want the fair tax, but the federal government should have revenue of some sort to do those things constitutionally mandated. And that revenue is coming from where?
Well, as I said, we've got a lot of it coming from the taxes, the employer paid taxes. Eventually,
so
of
that's
course,
where the revenue is coming from, the employer paid taxes.
Not all of it. That's the first in my list. So that's one of it. We've got tariffs. We've got excise duty, excise taxes, duties. We've got user fees. We've got all sorts of different things that are somewhat constitutional. And we've also got the corporate income tax, although that actually brings in a very small amount compared to everything else.
That's what I was looking for. I was trying to figure out where the revenue was coming from. So I want to make sure that people understood that.
And again, only half the revenue comes from the personal income tax.
Yeah. Just cutting the size of the government is important. You can't just cut taxes. And this is where the Democrats and the Republicans keep bouncing back and forth on spending. When the Republicans are in control, it's not an issue, but it is for the Democrats. And when the Democrats are in control, it's not an issue except for the Republicans to cut spending.
Right. And, Donald Trump came in as an outsider, said, hey, I'm going to cut I'm going to cut spending. I'm going to cut the deficit, cut the debt. And I'm a businessman. I know how to balance a budget. But the deficit increased faster under him than it did under Obama. So when I hear voters say, well, we can't let the Democrat in because they'll just increase spending, it's like, well, you mean faster than the guy who replaced the Democrat? So, yeah. And what's heartbreaking is when I ran for VP in '96. I remember going around telling people, we have $5 trillion of debt. How are we ever going to get out of this hole? It's massive. And now I look back and 5 trillion sounds rather quaint. It's like, I wish I had that problem now. And libertarians were sounding the alarm bell back then, saying that we keep digging ourselves into a bigger hole, and 5 trillion is way too much and it's just going to get bigger. And people said, oh, you're just being an alarmist. Well, here we are with it 5 times as much. And the one thing that I've been telling people is that the way to the way to get out of a hole is to stop digging. So first we got to stop digging. We got to cut spending, and then we can finally balance the budget.
Interestingly, I asked my listeners to do a computation. At $27 trillion, if you could cut spending to the point where you had $1 million a day left over, how long would it take to pay off the debt? And it would be in excess of 70,000 years. It is a problem.
It is.
And we're probably going to get around to that a little bit more, Dr. Jorgensen. Would you give your website out for people who are just tuning in for the first time?
I'd love to. Yes, it's joe20.com. That's JO20.com. And a fair warning, after the first presidential debate, it slowed to a halt because so many people after the debate were like, oh my gosh, is there another alternative out there? Is there anyone else I can vote for in this election? So there is going to be another debate tonight. So hopefully we can keep up with the traffic, but we can only keep up with so many people going to it.
I actually hope you get overwhelmed.
I do too.
Craig Schroeder from Missouri says, Gary, would you ask Joe, apparently you're on a first name basis.
Apparently.
That's a good thing that they feel comfortable enough. If Amy Coney Barrett is the kind of Supreme Court justice that she would nominate.
I would stick to a more strict constitutionalist. However, if I were a senator, I would absolutely vote to confirm her, because they could put up so much worse. I actually think she's a fairly good choice.
Let's talk a little bit about election dynamics. One of the questions I always hear from listeners about being a libertarian and voting for a libertarian for president is, even if the libertarian candidate won, how could they make a difference with the Democrats and the Republicans? How do you answer that?
Well, the one big thing I can do is, as commander-in-chief, on the very first day in office, I could start bringing the troops home. And absolutely, I would do that. In fact, I've promised that would be my very first official act. So I don't need Congress to go along with it. I can start bringing the troops home on day one. And I would make sure that we were out of the Middle East within about 90 days and then start working around the rest of the world. And as far as spending, and Congress, if it were up to me, I would get rid of, for instance, the Department of Education on the first day. However, I need the help of Congress to do that. But what I could do before then is I could tell Congress, I'm not going to sign any budget that's not balanced, any budget that has an increase. In fact, here's how much of a decrease I want. And I've jokingly said, I'm a teacher. I know how to send back an F paper. And if it wasn't balanced, I would send it back. And there's one myth that I tried to destroy in 1996, and I guess I wasn't successful. So many people think that, oh, why can't we go back to the good old days of Ronald Reagan? He gave us smaller government. Actually, he increased government year after year after year for 8 straight years. He increased spending. And so he didn't give us smaller government. He gave us bigger government. And the people close to him said, well, what do you expect? Congress wouldn't go along with him. And well, here's what I expect. I expect him to say, no, I'm not signing this. Take it back, sharpen your pencils, do it again. Now, granted, they could override the president, but if they sent me a budget 20 times that wasn't balanced or reduced enough, I would send it back 20 times, and they would have to work awfully hard to override me.
Well, I would think that if a libertarian like yourself would make it to the White House, that would mean Americans have awakened to the deficits of the Democrat and Republican Party. You probably have a libertarian Congress. But let's do this. Let's grab a video question from one of our friends out there. So let's do this. Let's play that first.
The United States have been at war roughly 2/3 of my entire life, and Democrats and Republicans make and break promises for peace all the time. What would you do differently?
I couldn't agree with you more. It's tragic. And every election cycle, Politicians promise more peace, but they only deliver more war. So my promise is to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. We're in about 150 different countries around the world, and we spend more than the next 7 countries combined. That has to end. And it'd be one thing if we were doing this, if it was just costing us money, but it's actually making us less safe. All we have to do is look back to 9/11. So once again, we need to have a strong military to protect our borders, but there's no reason for us to be the world's policeman anymore. And, you know, some people say, well, what about helping our friends? But still, you're getting involved in other countries and you're going to make somebody upset. Even Donald Trump, who's touting his recent peace agreement, not everybody's happy with it. So we need to just stay home and stop being bullies.
Democrats and Republicans, I think especially Republicans, would say if the United States ceases to involve and engage around the world, you would create a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. The world would come apart somehow. What do you think happens to the world if the United States brings home her military?
Well, first of all, I would work with people who knew what they were doing, work with generals to figure out how to fix it. But, you know, if we don't do it now, even if we do create a small vacuum, it's better than creating a larger vacuum 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And what if we had brought people home, brought our soldiers home before 9/11? Maybe we could have avoided that. And is it better to have a small vacuum there or to, bring peace to the world and maybe prevent an attack? Because, and let me point out, bin Laden used the fact that we were over there as propaganda. That was a recruiting tool to have people fly planes into our buildings. You know, he looked at he told his people, look, they told us they were going to be here temporarily. They're not, they're still here. They gave us this date, they're still here, and they're taking over our religion and our laws. And so it just made it that much easier for him to get people to attack us.
Dr. Jorgensen, I want to turn this around and start talking a little bit about healthcare. And we'll start with the biggest problem facing the country today, and that's dealing with COVID-19. President Trump did it his way. Vice President Biden says he would have done it differently. How would Libertarian President Jorgensen have handled COVID-19?
Well, differently than most of them, or both of them rather. And I would say that the biggest mistake that Trump made was not getting rid of the FDA obstacles that prevented us from getting tested. South Korea confirmed its first case within about a week of our first case, and they quickly jumped ahead in testing containing the spread. So while cases are skyrocketing in the US, they're getting ahead of it, and they did so without any lockdowns. Meanwhile, we're all under house arrest here. We can't go to our jobs. In fact, tens of millions of jobs were lost. Sometimes we can't even go to weddings and funerals of our loved ones. And that is not the way I would have done it. So, and also I'd like to mention that Trump stood on that stage with Dr. Fauci and said, if you don't have symptoms, you don't need to get tested. While at the time, the prevailing wisdom of the medical doctors was that over half the people who had the virus didn't have symptoms. So that's when you absolutely need to have testing, because if you can spread the virus and you don't have symptoms, then you need to know that you have it so you can stay home. So again, when people ask me, why are you running for office? My reply is because government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, too intrusive. But the worst part is they usually end up hurting the very people they're trying to help. And we see that with the FDA and the CDC. Dozens of testing kits out there we could have used. Between the two of them, they only allowed us to use 2 of them in the beginning. If we could have tested ourselves like South Korea, we could have gotten ahead of it.
So big government was the problem, and you would have circumvented it, and I applaud you for that. Let's talk about the cost of healthcare. It seems to be escalating at an incredible rate. The Affordable Care Act has done nothing to help reduce those costs. In fact, for friends and family of mine and myself, actually, the cost of healthcare has gone up.
And
How
any economist would have predicted that. And that's what they did. If you listen to the economists back there, that's what they were predicting. So if there is one message I could get to every American voter, that one message would be that we do not have a free market healthcare system, because we keep hearing politicians say, well, the free market didn't work, so guess we'll have to go to single payer. And my next question is, when they say we want to go to Medicare for all, my question is, aren't you really saying VA hospital for all? That top-down monopoly did not work for veterans, and it's not going to work for the country. And what astounds me is that people on the left who traditionally do not like monopolies, they don't like it when corporations have it. My question is, do you really think it would be better if the federal government had it? I would suggest it would be worse. And we're talking about healthcare, which is a life or death situation. If there's one area that you don't want a monopoly, if there's one area where you do want choice, it would be healthcare.
Can we talk a little bit about prescription drugs? President Trump has allows now for government agencies to purchase drugs from other countries that are initially manufactured here in an attempt to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. So what would you do to lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Well, again, we need to have it more towards a free market system. So the state of Indiana has a good system in which they have real insurance. And I'd love to talk about that in a minute. But in a very short time, the number of people who use generic drugs went from something like 10% to 90%. And it's not a surprise that people weren't using generic drugs to begin with, because, as I say, you never spend other people's money as well as you spend your own. So within a short time, it went to 90% because they got to keep the savings. And that's the way it should be. When you buy a car, groceries, whatever, you get to keep the savings. And so there are a lot of laws out there. Let's lower the cost of drugs. Or there's another law saying, okay, we're going to require every healthcare provider to post prices so that you know how much it costs. Well, think of how ridiculous a law would be telling grocery stores they have to post prices, or telling car dealerships they have to post prices on their cars. I mean, or computers in computer stores. Of course, they don't have to have a law because people are spending their own money. And if you look at the only two somewhat free market systems in our country, which would be LASIK surgery and cosmetic surgery, you see that prices are given upfront very easily. And you see healthcare providers competing on price so that they get customers. And that's the way it should work.
I'm going to kind of swing back to the main healthcare question, because it occurs to me that while I was watching the Amy Coney Barrett testimony on Capitol Hill, the Democrats kept bringing up example after example of somebody who benefited from the Affordable Care Act. And it was a sympathetic plea. It was, if the Republicans take this away, I won't be able to afford my health care. How do you respond to those kinds of emotional arguments? How do you respond to somebody who says, I've got diabetes, a pre-existing condition. I would never be able to afford health care without the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's more popularly known.
Well, I would say, how do you know without Obamacare that prices wouldn't be even lower? And I suggest they would. In fact, if you look in Singapore, where they've got a somewhat free market system, doctor visits are only $10. That's cheaper than our copay. And their price per person is about 1/3. Their healthcare costs per person are about 1/3 what they are here. And some of the prices that have been bandied about are that heart bypass surgery in this country costs $130,000, whereas over there it costs $18,000. Because just like over here, we've got people competing for customers with LASIK surgery. Over there, they've got people competing for all types of healthcare. And I'd like to point out that if you look at a 20-year period from the early 1990s to around 2012, prices of LASIK surgery, which actually it started out to be, the previous technology. And by the way, that should tell you all you need to know right there. The fact that they went to new technology because there's people out there competing. So the prices went from, they went down about 70%. While at the same time, general healthcare prices went up 125%. So if we're talking about the poor, if we're talking about people who need cheap healthcare, I'm suggesting, why don't we have a system in which prices go down instead of going up?
That's a really good point. It seems to me that, well, in all honesty, the government got in control of education to drive down the prices. They're through the roof. They got in charge of healthcare, and the prices are going up. It seems to me there's a pattern here that we might want to look into.
Yeah. Another thing is, we hear, especially the Democrats, but we hear people saying, oh, let's go to single payer. Well, all you have to do is look at Great Britain and Canada and see how it's not working. Why not look at a country where it is working? Why are you looking at countries where it doesn't work?
I'm very interested in the numbers in Singapore and how their healthcare system. I didn't know it was as free a market as it is. But that's very encouraging.
Well, it's free. Here's the good thing about Singapore. And it's like I said, it's not totally free market. It's just closer to what we have in that they have actual insurance. And the biggest problem with our healthcare system is our insurance isn't real insurance. In any other industry, real insurance only covers unexpected costs. So imagine if your car insurance paid for gas, oil, car washes. First of all, you would have absolutely no reason to shop around for the cheapest gas prices. In fact, you might even go to the nicest gas station where they serve you free coffee while you wait, because what do you care? You whip out your little $5 copay and off you go. It costs as much to go to the expensive gas station as the cheap one. So why not go to the expensive one? Then the gas stations could increase prices without you even knowing, because they're passing it along to the car insurance companies. And in turn, the car insurance companies would increase your premiums the following year. And then you get the spiral. And this is exactly the spiral we have with health costs, that there's nobody in there who is holding the prices down. There's nobody held accountable. And one other quick thing, it's a dirty little secret that, people think, well, the insurance companies, they want to hold prices down. Actually, no, it's in their benefit to award more claims every year, because then they get to raise prices. Now, of course, they can't pay out all claims. They don't have enough money. They don't have bottomless pockets. But it's in their best interest to have healthcare costs go up so that the following year they can increase your premiums so that they make bigger profits the following year. So you've got the patient, you've got the doctor, you've got the insurance company. Nobody's holding down prices.
On your car insurance analogy, if my boss is paying for my insurance, I'm all in. I'm good with that. Let him pay.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. And it goes back to my, government hurts the very people they try to help. We are the only country in the industrialized world to have insurance, health insurance tied to our employment. And why is that? Well, it's because of the government, because in World War II, they had a wage and price freeze control. They didn't want prices to go up. They said, oh, let's fix this problem this way. And so companies were like, okay, well, we want to entice the best employees. So how do we do that if we can't offer more money? I know, we'll offer benefits. And so here we are decades later, government tries to fix one problem, creates 10 more. And here we are having our health insurance tied to our employment. So two things. First of all, that means if you lose your job, now you lose your health insurance. And it means if you really hate your job, maybe you want to go to a different job, you might be tied to your job because you can't get health insurance or because you've got pre-existing conditions or something like that. So wouldn't it be great if it were like car insurance, in which you had one insurance company and you could keep with that company your entire life? Or if you found a better deal, you'd go to somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's great. You don't lose your car insurance when you change jobs. You shouldn't lose your health insurance, but that's government involvement. Let's go grab a video.
Do you mind if I interrupt? I bet you we're not going to hear Trump or Biden say anything like that tonight.
No, but that's why I'm supporting you.
Thank you.
And by the way, while I'm admitting to everybody, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows that I'm supporting you, I am going to be asking you some even tougher questions as we go along here, because that's what you have to do to be president of the United States, and I think you can handle it. Let's grab a video question now.
Dr. Jorgensen, how do you feel our global standing fared under the Trump administration, and how do you think it will fare if you are president?
Well, I think it got worse because Trump provoked Iran by ordering the assassination of last January. Soleimani, I'm sorry. And also his trade war with China is also provoking hostilities. There's a reason it's called a trade war. And Trump starting the trade war could lead to a real war. Now, the same thing would happen under Joe Biden because he's got a Buy American plan, which will continue the trade wars. And he was one of the instigators in the Iraqi war. And he's basically been a war hawk throughout his career. So under my presidency, I will stop provoking hostilities. Again, one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral, and I will unilaterally open up trade. When goods cross borders, soldiers don't.
For people who are not familiar with you, who are tuning in right now for the first time, and I'm sure a lot of them are intrigued by the answers you're giving, because you don't hear this from the left and the right, but they may want to know a little bit more about your background. So could you tell us a little bit more about your history?
Well, first of all, I'm the granddaughter of immigrants. 3 of my 4 grandparents immigrated to this country. And it was my grandmother from Denmark who gave me, I think, the love I have of this country, because she used to tell me how in the old country, it didn't matter how hard you worked. It didn't matter if you worked a second or third job. The government took everything away so that you had the same. And by the way, listening to her story, first of all, it might sound like, she was from the Soviet Union or an Eastern Bloc country, not Denmark. But secondly, she would tell me these stories from her trailer, because when she and my grandfather retired, they retired to a trailer park, and they were just so happy to be there because they still had freedom. Or, well, let me quickly add, she would correct me and say it's a mobile home, not a trailer. But it's not like they had a lot of money. They just loved the freedom of this country. And so that was my background, listening to my grandmother. Also, I read Animal Farm in grade school, and it really struck a chord. And I've had people ask me, interviewers ask me, so I guess what, you were student body president or student council? And I kind of ruffle at that. I bristle at that because my answer is, oh my gosh, no. I just didn't like the idea that even in high school, we had an elite few making rules for the rest of us. I thought, well, that's not fair. We should each be making our own decision. And then later on, I heard about the Libertarian Party, luckily, while I was still in college, before I had voted. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody else agrees with me. This is great. And last, let me mention one other thing. I have had interviewers ask me, so when did you become interested in politics? And my answer is, I'm still not interested in politics. I think that voting Libertarian is an act of self-defense. I'm not doing it to get out there for power. I never took a political science class in my life. I'm here doing it just because I think that people can make better decisions than the people in Washington. My PhD is in industrial organizational psychology, and I'm basically a teacher. I teach at Clemson University.
All right. Let's go attack some of the elephants in the room, because this is important and I hear about it all the time. If I vote for Joe Jorgensen, then, and you can fill in the blank, either Biden or Trump is going to get elected to the White House. So why should somebody on either side of the coin want to suddenly say, no, I'm going to vote Libertarian?
Well, first of all, there are about 40 million people who lean Libertarian. And if we would all vote the way we want to vote, I would win in a landslide, and then people would be in charge of their own lives. However, when I talk to people individually, what I tell a Trump supporter is kind of what I told you earlier tonight, Gary. I say, I understand why you voted for Trump. He said, I'm a businessman. I can balance a budget. I'm going to cut spending, going to bring the troops home. I'm an outsider. However, he's done none of that. So to people in a solidly red state, I say, look, Trump's going to get the Electoral College votes anyway. So why not send him a message, vote for me, and tell him, look, we want you to go back to being an outsider, or maybe start being an outsider since he never really was an outsider. Send him the message that we elected you to be an outsider, so start acting like one. And to people on the left, especially if they're in a blue state, I say, look, Joe Biden's going to get your Electoral College votes anyway. So how about sending a message to the Democratic Party? And I tell them how my heart breaks that, the Democratic Party that I grew up with in the 60s, they were anti-war, they were pro-individual, they were pro-free speech. They're none of that now. In fact, Joe Biden's a war hawk. They muzzled Tulsi Gabbard, kept her off the stage, the only anti-war voice there was. And since Joe Biden is following on Barack Obama's coattails, I point out, by the way, did you know that both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were against gay marriage? They thought gay marriage should be illegal as recently as 2012. So if you want somebody who's really anti-war, if you want somebody who is for the little guy, for the minorities, vote for me. And by the way, probably Joe Biden wasn't your first choice. It was the Democratic Party leadership that kind of rammed him down your throat. Why don't you send a message to the Democratic Party? Hey, let us pick our own candidates. If you're going to give us candidates, we're not going to vote for them. Now, to the swing states, I say, you know what? You can actually make a difference. They're going to listen to you. If you're in a red state and you vote for me instead of Trump, they may not listen to you that much. But if you're in a swing state, they will listen to you. And wouldn't that be great to make Republicans start acting like Republicans again and Democrats to start acting like Democrats again? And I'd like to point out that the Libertarian Party was formed when Richard Nixon stopped acting like a Republican, if he ever did. But it finally became so egregious, it was over the top.
That's absolutely right. One of the other issues that come up on a regular basis, and I've learned to deal with this repeatedly, and that is libertarians and the drug war. Oh, woe is me. You want people to be shooting up heroin in the middle of the street, laying in the gutter. We can't let that happen. How do you respond to that? Because as a libertarian, I'm sure you agree with me that the drug war is killing people.
Oh, absolutely. And the questions I've been asking to the people I've been campaigning to is, when's the last time you heard of a liquor store owner trying to push gin on high school students? Or when's the last time you heard of a vodka addict breaking into houses in order to support a vodka habit? And when was the last time you heard of two liquor store owners having a shootout over the best corner? What we have now is not a drug problem. What we have is a prohibition problem. Just like Al Capone back in the 1920s, again, gang warfare, drive-by shootings, people being killed. We've got that in Chicago today, the drive-by shootings and killing of innocent people over drugs now instead of alcohol. We saw how the alcohol prohibition didn't work. Why are we doing the same thing with drugs? And if you don't mind my adding on to that, I was in a podcast once where the person said to me, okay, well, I'm with you on the marijuana, but something like meth, that's so horrible. We got to outlaw meth. And I said, actually, because it's horrible, that's why it shouldn't be outlawed, because he was concerned maybe his next door neighbor would be running a meth house and, it's got toxic fumes and the kids and, people had bought houses that were meth houses and, they were pretty much unlivable. And I asked him, when's the last time he heard of somebody making bathtub gin? I mean, because alcohol is legal, we don't have people making bathtub gin and selling it. So wouldn't it be nice if places like, or companies like Philip Morris or Seagram's, that they were making the meth instead of your next door neighbor? Wouldn't that make it safer for you? And so many people say, I don't use illegal drugs, so it doesn't affect me. Well, I don't use illegal drugs either, never have. I jokingly say my drug of choice is bourbon. However, it's affecting everybody, and we need to have safer streets, safer schools, and not have the drive-by shootings and the gangs. The drug prohibition is only putting money into gangs who are violent and police themselves.
We've got a lot of questions, and we're starting to cut into the second half of this event, this town hall. So let me get another video question in.
Hi, Joe. I'm Lenise, and I have a question about nuclear energy. How would nuclear energy be best phased in for our country, since a lot of our country is powered currently by coal-based power plants, which are less efficient than nuclear power? Would it start at the federal level or around the state level? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I don't think the government should be in charge of energy at all. And notice she said that, gas and oil, basically fossil fuels, that they're inefficient. And notice that's the industry that the government is subsidizing. The government subsidizes something like $15 billion a year to fossil fuels, and that doesn't even include the cheap leases. So as far as nuclear energy, what I've been doing is I've been going around saying, let's have a level playing field. I'm not going to put money towards any gas, oil, coal, sun, wind, nuclear. Not a penny of taxpayers' dollars should go towards the energy field. What we need to do is we need to have people competing for us. Now, some people are a little concerned about nuclear energy, and they're looking back at, technology that was 40 years old, 50 years, well, 60 years old by now. And I'd like to point out that what we had was basically a government monopoly. So imagine if we look at all the computers today. We've got Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and IBM and all these people, and the government points to Bill Gates and says, "Okay, we're choosing you. Everybody else can go home, and we're going to just stick with this technology." That's kind of what happened with nuclear energy. So there was no reason to compete. So we didn't see any innovation. Well, now we're starting to see innovation, what they call fourth generation or advanced generation. And for example, Rolls-Royce, the luxury car manufacturer, they've come up with a nuclear reactor that's like 1/10 the size of a regular, of an old nuclear reactor. But I've pointed out that part of the reason that we've got such great smartphones and great computers is because Bill Gates and Steve Jobs hated each other. They competed against each other to try to get the biggest market share, the lowest price, the best quality. And that's what I want to see in the energy field. I want to see people putting their own money towards it, coming to us with solutions, and we the customers, we the consumers, we get to pick the ones that we want. And government just needs to stay out of it, because once again, as government always does, it's going to be them just giving their capitalist cronies, which is not really capitalism at all, but crony capitalism, but giving their friends and their special interests money ahead of everybody else, which is why they're handing out $15 billion in the inefficient energies, as she pointed out.
Very quickly, if somebody goes to your website, do you have a segment on energy and where you stand on it? Is there?
I believe I do. I believe I do. And I believe it says level playing field. And it says, I think that nuclear energy would come out.
And the website again is?
jo20.com. That's jo20.com.
jo20.com.
And you better go there now before it crashes again after, well, actually, okay. So it was explained to me by my chief technology officer that technically we didn't crash, but yes, it slowed to a halt. So you may want to go there now before the end of the debate, when everybody starts running around looking for another alternative.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. In fact, you're going to be on my radio broadcast tomorrow.
Yes.
In the morning.
And I'll give you a report on it. I'll let you know what happened.
I may jot down some of the questions they're asked and then ask you those questions. For those of
that's great.
For those of you who are tuning in, you'll be able to listen to that anywhere in the country, or virtually anywhere in the world. Go to GaryNolan.com and then click on the Listen Live or Listen Here button. I think it's a red button in the upper right-hand corner. When we're talking about a free market in energy, some people are going to say, well, you can't have a free market in energy because people will buy what's cheapest, and that might be coal or gasoline, and they'll never convert to anything else. So we have to use the government to steer people toward what some would call cleaner energy. But
right now, the government is giving money to carbon dense fuels, to fossil fuels. So they're already working against the environment, I would say. And I would say nuclear power is, for its carbon footprint, it's awesome, and it would be much better, and it would be cheaper. And besides that, if you look at a globe of the Earth, and wherever you see countries, wherever you see bigger government, you see more pollution. Wherever you see less government, you see less pollution. So technology tends to win out, and it tends to it tends to be technologically superior and less pollution.
We've talked about healthcare, we've talked about taxes, we've talked about the national debt, we've talked about national security. Let's talk a little bit about education. You said you'd get rid of the Department of Education.
Yeah.
Aren't you concerned that public schools around the country will fail? And what do you think about subsidizing loans for students to go to college? Do you want these kids to struggle to survive, never to get ahead without having a college degree? I mean, you've got a PhD. Shouldn't others be able to get one too?
Well, keep in mind that we've got taxpayers giving money. Something, at least $500 per pupil is going to the Department of Education, and schools are seeing very little of it back. So without the Department of Education, then localities could keep their money instead of having it go into a big black hole in Washington, D.C. So I would suggest that getting rid of the Department of Education would actually help schools, because they would be able to hang on to their money. And maybe school teachers wouldn't have to go around, buying boxes of Kleenex and crayons with their own money. And as far as loans go, this is another perfect example of how government usually hurts the very people they try to help. So yes, it was challenging to get a college degree while working full time or even working part time, but it could be done. And government came along and said, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice to help these people? Let's, flood the market with money and give them loans." Well, anybody who knows anything about economics knows that the prices are going to go up, and that's exactly what happened. So now we've got kids who have taken out, close to predatory loans thanks to the federal government. And now they're required to pay them back. And before they even begin their life, they're underwater. And it's just tragic what the government has done to them. So I would suggest that the Department of Education has done more to hurt us than help us. And keep in mind, we've had the Department of Education since the 70s, and we haven't seen education go up. We haven't seen our scores rise. At best, they've stayed the same, and yet it's cost a heck of a lot more money.
If you just tuned in, it's Joe Jorgensen, 2020, Libertarian presidential candidate. We were talking about education, among other things. Let's go back and grab a video question from somebody out there in the country who probably.
Hi, Dr. Jorgensen. I'm wondering about opting out for Social Security. I would definitely choose to opt out of Social Security if that was an option. And I'm wondering how, if so many people opted out, how it would stay solvent and be able to be funded for seniors who need it now and in the future. Thanks.
Excellent question. And first of all, I'd like to point out that if we have an opt-out program, we don't have to worry about seniors in the future relying on Social Security, because that means you could opt out, have your own retirement system, which would be much safer than Social Security. Now, absolutely, we've got to help the seniors who have paid in. If you think about it, they had their money taken from their paychecks before they even saw their paychecks. Now, unlike, Al Gore talked about this lockbox, let's put our Social Security into a lockbox where it's safe. That was never done. In fact, if the Social Security Administration were put up against the same laws that federal government has against securities companies, it would be illegal. It'd be a Ponzi scheme. So what we need to do is absolutely take care of our seniors. So what I would do is, since that money didn't go into a lockbox, it was used to fund government, to buy everything that government shouldn't be going into. I would sell a lot of those assets. For instance, fancy downtown office buildings or water rights, mineral rights. Use that money to give seniors a lump sum, so now they don't have to be under the whims of Congress. Now they can control their money and not worry about cost of living adjustments as they go along. And absolutely opt out for anybody who wants to, because a lot of people know that they're not going to see a penny of it. It's a broken system.
Republicans will say, Republicans will complain that they paid into the system, they're entitled to it. But really, if you listen to the way the law is written, and I know that economically this doesn't make sense, but the way the law is written, allegedly you're only paying half the money that goes in there. Your employer is paying the other half. Right. So would you give them back the entire roughly 13%, or would you give them back the half that came out of their paycheck?
Well, it depends on how much the assets could be sold for. And there are estimates that it would be anywhere from, I don't know, 10, what, I don't even want to say 10 trillion to 160 trillion, whatever. So it's hard to say exactly how much we could sell all the assets for. But we start, of course, with the older people who are 100%, something like 12% of the population completely relies on Social Security. We absolutely have to take care of them first. But I would look at replacing their amount. And I think a good program, a good model to follow would be Cato's 6.2% solution.
Social Security is kind of like, it's like walking down the street and the old person behind you sticks a gun in your back and says, give me your money. And then you walk up to the next generation and you do the same thing to them. And eventually I think we're going to have a real problem. Can you tick through some of the departments that you would get rid of? You'd get rid of the Department of Energy?
Yes.
Department of Education?
Oh, that would be the first one I would go after.
I might point out that when Jimmy Carter and the Democrats enacted the Department of Education, one of the things Ronald Reagan said he would do is get rid of the Department of Education. The Republicans have subsequently been in power, had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and they've never gotten rid of the Department of Education.
So let's go back to the wasted vote question. There's another answer to your wasted vote question,
Yeah. What about the Environmental Protection Agency?
Oh my gosh, absolutely get rid of them.
Why, you don't care?
Can I talk about the environment? Can I talk about the environment?
You don't care about kids? You don't care about the environment, the air they breathe?
No, in fact, the environment is something that is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, we went on a bus tour and everybody else on the bus will tell you how fanatical I was about recycling, how I would start collecting cans in the back. Every now and then, if we couldn't find a place to put them in recycle, they'd start kind of like taking them in the middle of the night when I couldn't see them because I was hoarding all the cans in the back to recycle. So no, the environment is one of my personal biggest topics. And if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you two different scenarios, which I think explain why the government would be the last people that you would go to. And for anybody out there who's interested in the environment, I would suggest you check out a wonderful group in Montana called PERC. It's PERC. And I met two women from there, wonderful people. And they told me the story of how there was land with timber growing and the government was going, basically giving it out to the highest bidder to come in and do what they wanted with it. So the timber company put in their bid. Well, there were some locals around who said, you know what, we kind of like the forest. We like the trees. How about let's put in a bid and, maybe we can keep the forest the way it is and keep it from the timber company. So they put in a bid and they won. And they were somewhat surprised. And then the next question they had was, oh my gosh, how are we going to raise the money now? Well, it didn't surprise me at all that they were able to raise the money in 2 weeks because a lot of people say, yes, I want the trees there. Well, if the story ended there, then all would be happy with the world. But what happened was, after that happened, the Montana legislature passed a law so that that could never happen again. So that from now on, the timber companies will always win, because that's the way government works. They know who put them in office. It's the special interests. It's people gave them campaign contributions. They're going to be on the side of the companies, the corporations every time, not the side of the little guy. And the other thing I'd like to point out, because a while back when we had the Gulf oil spill, so many people said, oh, see, this is why we need government, because corporations just don't care about the environment. But what they didn't know is that the government had given them a liability cap so they wouldn't be held responsible. So in a free market, what would have happened is they would have had to have gone to an insurance company, and the insurance company would have said, no, we're not going to insure you. It's too expensive. It's too risky. We don't want to have to pay out a claim. Or the insurance company would have said, well, it's kind of risky, but tell you what, we'll insure you, but we're going to come out every week, every month, whatever, and inspect the rig so that nothing happens because we don't want to pay out a claim. So you've got the profit motive working to help the environment. But instead, what happened was, the legislatures were like, got an oil spill. We'll just let the taxpayers clean it up. And the taxpayers footed the bill. So the people in Congress don't have any skin in the game. They don't have any reason to keep the environment pristine. It's us, it's the individuals, it's charity groups, it's Audubon Society and all these other people who care much more about the environment. And I would say that the last people I would entrust with the environment would be legislators, would be politicians.
What do you think of anthropogenic global warming? Do you believe it? Do you have questions, doubts?
I don't get into that debate. It doesn't matter how we're here. And I'm not going to get into a debate of how we got here, how fast it was the hockey stick right or not. I'm just saying, here we are now. What's the best way we can take care of the planet? What can we do now? And all I know is wherever we see the free market, we see less pollution. Wherever we see bigger government, communism, we see more pollution. So I say I side on the side of the free market.
All right, I like that. I'll go along with that. The Second Amendment is important to a lot of people. I host two programs on guns. And I don't think the founding fathers gave me the right to own and bear arms so that I could go hunting or even to repel the bad guy. I think they had a bigger scheme in mind. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment?
Well, first of all, I am a gun owner, but it doesn't matter because the Libertarian Party believes that you have the right to defend yourself. And I would go even further and say that you have the right to own any object, whether it's a gun to defend yourself or drugs for whatever reason you wish, that it's not the thing that's causing the problem. If I were president, I would try to get rid of every gun law that's been enacted in the last 100 years and do everything I could to keep the egregious red flag laws from being passed, because that's having your constitutional rights taken away without even a fair trial. But I would take it a step further. We recently saw the gun debate in Virginia, how they were going to pass an outlandish law. And I would do the same thing the federal government did to George Wallace when he stood on the steps of the University of Alabama and kept Black students from entering the university. The federal government stepped in and said, no, you can't take away their constitutional rights. I would step in, and that's a big thing for me, because a lot of things, when people ask me about education or police or whatever, I say, no, federal government not involved. But if somebody's taking away our constitutional rights, like our Second Amendment, I would step in.
There was a discussion, and I remember getting comments from listeners on my Facebook page and calling my program because there was a post, I think a tweet that your Twitter account had, and relating to Black Lives Matter. Where do you stand with Black Lives Matter?
So first of all, that was a typo. That wasn't supposed to be in capital letters. And where I stand is, we agree on the problems. We agree that we need to end qualified immunity. We need to end no-knock raids. We need to end the racist and destructive war on drugs. Unfortunately, the head group of Black Lives Matter is Marxist, and they want to turn to big government for the answer. And I, as a libertarian, says, no, the government is the one that's causing the problem. We need to get away from big government. And so, first of all, it breaks my heart that they're going to the very people who are causing the problem. But secondly, yeah, of course, I'm against Marxism, but I'm happy to talk to anybody who we can at least agree on what the problem is, and maybe let's agree on a solution. And I did talk with a local Black Lives Matter leader who, not affiliated with the larger group, who, by the way, he was a Black preacher, had been in prison, wonderful guy. We spent most of the day together. And when I found out that he was a felon, I said, the Libertarian Party believes that just because you serve time in jail doesn't mean that you lose the right to defend yourself. And he said, wow, I had never thought of it that way. And then, of course, I told him my Rosa Parks story, which he knew about Rosa Parks, who was asked to sit on the back of the bus. And I asked him, did you realize that was a government-run, government-owned bus? And he said, no, I had no idea. And I said, yeah, and 60% of the bus ridership were Blacks. Imagine if Uber did that. If they discriminated against the best 60% of their customers, they'd go bankrupt, as well they should. It's only government that can go by unaccounted for like that. And he was really interested in my ideas and said, yeah, you make a lot of good points. And he actually went to the state convention as my guest later that evening. So if I can reach out to groups who agree on the problem, and if we can show them how our way is better and have them join our movement, then why not? Because I think a lot of people, and I hate to use the word ignorant, but the true sense of the word ignorant, they just haven't thought through this. And they're ignorant to how, okay, that's right, government is causing the problem. Maybe it would be better to turn away from government. So I'll talk to anybody who will listen to me explain how free markets and individual liberty and personal freedom is a much better choice.
Do you get into that on your website too? Is there a drop down that talks
that
about
I'm not
issues?
that I'm not sure.
All right. Well, if somebody wants to look up.
We recently had our website redesigned. Well, it's been maybe a month by now. It's hard to keep up.
What is that website?
Joe20.com. That's JO20.com. And you better go now before it shuts down.
I want you to keep repeating that so that people who tune in or tune in late and want to know more, they've missed part of this, that they know where to go to get more information. So keep throwing that out there for me if you would. I want to talk to you about law enforcement, and I want to talk to you about welfare.
In 5 minutes? Wow, that's a lot to cover in 5 minutes.
All right, so I'm going to pick my topic. I'm going to pick my topic, and it's going to be the welfare state. This is something that the argument is if we end welfare, the kids are going to suffer, and we shouldn't let the kids suffer. So we have to continue this. Where do you stand on welfare?
Well, of course, or what?
SNAP, as it's called now.
Okay, yes, SNAP and TANF. Of course, I wouldn't go around and just start yanking benefits until we have a system that replaces it. But once again, the government can't do anything better than we as individuals working together can do. And I point back to the early 90s with the United Way, who, a private charity, of course, who the CEO decided to get something like $400,000 in artwork, which, by the way, would be worth close to $1 million now. And what happened was donations dried up. People said, you know what, we gave you that money to help unwed mothers or to help mothers who can't work, who have young children, who can't be, who can't afford food. We gave you that money for substance abuse people who need help. We didn't give you that money for fancy schmancy artwork. So the United Way had to prove that, yes, they were getting the money to where it could do the most good. And so they had to basically clean up their act, and they got the money going again. But with the federal government, they've got high overhead. In fact, what was it back? The UN ambassador, something like $50,000, $80,000, I can't remember, $50,000 at least on curtains or something. As taxpayers, we can't say, no, that's a waste of our money. We're not going to give it to you. So the federal government is unaccountable. It takes so much more money to get a dollar from a person who wants to give it to a person in need that it would be done much better through charity. And here's what really upsets me too, is I hear people like Bill Gates or Oprah Winfrey, these people with a lot of money, saying, you know what, I need to be paying more in taxes. The government should tax me more. Well, Bill Gates has his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Oprah Winfrey started that school for the girls over in Africa, and she's doing other things with her money. If you think the government can do that much better with your money, then why not simply turn your money over to the government? In fact, Bill Gates, why don't you simply turn over Microsoft to the government if you think they can run things better than you can? I would say, even though I tend to be more of a Mac person, I would much rather give my money to Bill Gates any day to run a charity than I would the federal government.
I think we've got a little over a minute left. And what I'd like you to do is tell people out there why they should vote for you. Give them you got 1 minute to pitch Joe Jorgensen for president.
What I would tell to every American voter out there is you know better than any special interest or bureaucrat how to spend your money. You know what your family needs better than any bureaucrat in Washington. And if you keep your money and you get to make your own decisions, then we will have a better society after all. Things are not better with people in Washington running our lives. Things are only more expensive and much more inefficient. And wouldn't it be better, instead of voting for a candidate who's going to give you a one-size-fits-all solution, either we all get vaccinated or we all wear masks or we all go to school without prayer? Wouldn't it be nice to get to vote with your feet or vote with your dollars every day, where during the day you can choose, okay, today I'm going to vote for a mask. I'm going to go shop at Walmart or one of the other stores. Or today, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to vote to not wear a mask. Why would we want to turn our decision-making power over to people like Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and the rest of them? You know best what's best for your family, and I trust you to make your decisions much better than any lobbyist in Washington. And I would say vote Joe Jorgensen in November. Go to joe20.com. And by the way, about 75% of our volunteers are from outside the party, so people know that we have a broken system.
And you're on all 50 state ballots?
I am. And a little Wikipedia fact here, I'm the only woman in the history of the country to be on the ballot in all 50 states twice.
That's pretty remarkable. Yeah. Thank you.